Hey, it's Jamie Edwards, and today I've got a really special guest for you on the channel. Woody Zuill is here today to talk about mob programming, and I think this is one of the things that it's very controversial out there. There's a lot of people that are trying to decide, how do we do something like this on a project, but I thought having Woody on today to talk specifically about what does it mean to use something like this on your software project, and what would the benefits be to you maybe as a developer or a lead of a development team when you're kind of struggling a little bit with how do I make sure my team's happy and they're healthy and they're getting work done, but management is giving us the space to be successful. So I'll just open it up to you, Woody. We can really let this go anywhere you want it to go, and why don't you maybe just, if you want to talk about the concept, how you found it, or maybe a bit of your background, that would be great.
Well, excellent. Thanks, Jamie. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. So mob programming itself just grew out of the efforts of a team that was essentially trying to learn how to work well together. It's folks that were spending time trying things out and experimenting with things. And when we stumbled upon this thing of just working together, it proved to be really useful to us, and we kept doing it. And over a short amount of time, within a year of when we started doing it, other people were finding out about what we were doing through no efforts of our own. And we started trying to find a way to explain what we were doing, and that led to us making a short video of us working for a whole day, and a time-lapse video. We made a 3-minute video that you can find on YouTube.
Awesome.
For those of your listeners who have heard of YouTube,
I'll put a link in the video to that so people can watch it. Yeah.
And it's easy enough to find. Sure. And I'd like to make it clear also that we at first, all we thought was that we were doing something that was working for us. And what we found was that many other people were interested in it, and now many people have done it.
Cool.
We're finding people are using it all over the world.
That's amazing.
So I'll cover any aspects of this you want to cover. So I talk about this a great deal, and I've got a lot of material that I can talk about. Experiences we've had, experiences others have had, plus things that we've been trying or have tried that worked or didn't work, and so on and so on.
That's awesome. That's a great intro. So yeah, let me throw out there and just see if this kind of helps direct the conversation a little bit. A little bit of and I'll show a bit of my ignorance here. I apologize, but I'll kind of share with you how I heard about mob programming, what I kind of thought it was for, and then the more I've looked into your message and kind of talked to other people, I know there's more to it than that, and maybe you can fill in the blanks for me. So I first heard about it about a little less than 2 years ago. One of the things I've kind of shared with my audience on YouTube is as a consultant, I've been so heads down at companies for the last decade. I'm a big agile proponent, but I don't often have the time to go out there and kind of look at the industry, go to conferences, see everything everybody's doing. So I had a friend reach out to me. We went out to coffee, and he was telling me about mob programming, and he was like, yeah, I'm out at this client. They have this team where there's a lot of problems with information being shared across the team. And I want to say this was maybe a 10 to 15 person size team, so it wasn't huge, but it was still, kind of hitting up against those communication challenges. And so I think he said, and I want to have him on eventually as a guest as well, but I think he said it took him almost a month, to kind of sell management on at least giving this a try with this team. And it was one of those things where I guess when they got started, there was some nervousness, but ultimately it was very successful. What it did was, from my understanding, and I promise I'm going to flip this right back to you, but from my understanding, one of the biggest challenges on that team was there was this assumption that all the developers knew the same patterns, they understood the code the same way, they were all on the same page about, their release process and testing. And the reality that this friend of mine realized was it was far from the case. Everybody was very out of sync. And so, at least for him, I think the attractiveness of mob programming was, this is a way I can take a team that's having some problems, kind of eliminate a lot of the barriers and just get them all in the same room so they're all on the same page.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's how I kind of heard about it. And I don't know if that's sort of the primary kind of, I know there's a lot of aspects to it, so maybe you can expand on it for me.
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, so for starters, we have to recognize that just like everything else, this is going to be very contextual. It's going to be based on the context in which it's being done.
Right.
But I kind of like to joke about this in this way. I've never been to a company where I said, well, essentially what we're trying to learn to do is how to work well together. And I've never had any company say, no, we don't want to work well together. That's not something we want to do.
Right.
So, I'm sorry, I got my phone just started talking to me.
No problem.
Yeah, that's the thing with these modern devices. If you're not paying attention, they will double track you.
Definitely.
Okay, so here's the
I
thing.
can cut that out if we need to, so no big deal.
Yeah, no big deal.
Yeah.
Now let them see we're humans. They
Yes,
might otherwise
for sure.
think we're robots of some kind.
Okay.
So here's the thing: is that if there is a benefit to be had from working well together, can we turn up the good on this? This is sort of how I view it. If you're doing something, some kind of a practice, and you like the value it's giving you, then an essential thing to be doing is pay attention. And if we pay attention, then we can notice these things, and we can ask ourselves this question: is this something we can do even more? Or how would we turn up the good on it?
Right.
So essentially, the team that I was working with at the time we stumbled upon this idea was a team of people that were essentially working siloed. They were working on many different things. They were completely overloaded on the work they were doing.
Right.
And which is not uncommon, but it's also a big dysfunction in most companies, thinking that we need to keep everybody busy all the time.
Yes.
What we really need to do is make it easy for them to be effective all the time. There's a big difference there.
Absolutely.
Being busy is actually plays into concepts about efficiency.
Yes.
And in many cultures, efficiency means we're doing something with, without wasting any time or motion. But what we're really doing is doing a lot of things to keep us busy as opposed to being effective. So
Right.
effectiveness to me is we're actually working on the right thing, and we might be working on it in a very efficient manner, and we're going to end up with good results because of that. But something I think that my dad used to say, he was a kind of I would say he would be called now maybe a systems analyst or something like that. But he worked in the phone company doing engineering type things. And he would say, I'd rather work slowly on the right thing than quickly on the wrong thing, or something like that. And that goes for so many things in life. If we spend some time trying to figure out what's the right thing, that's time well spent. And figuring out what that right thing is actually something we can't usually discover without trying to do some stuff in the first place. So this is the idea that, saying that I've been using for years, which is it's in the doing of the work that we discover the work that we must do.
Yes.
Until we start taking action, then we're still just analyzing, and we're not getting to the point where we're going to learn something that's really meaningful to us. And I can say that in a slightly different way. A lot of times we try to make decisions without gathering the right information upon which to base those decisions.
Yes.
Because we don't want to do the wrong thing, so we don't do anything at all until we've decided what to do. And now we've invested so much in that, it sort of gives us this sunk cost fallacy sort of a situation. We've invested so much in getting to determine, or getting to the place where we've determined what it is we think we should be doing, that we don't want to quit doing that thing.
Exactly.
Even though we found it's the wrong thing to be doing.
Exactly.
Because now so many people have been involved in those decisions sometimes that we'd have to go back to them and say, hey, we've changed our mind, and now we need to support why we've changed our mind and what we think we need to do instead. And all of these things are barriers to making good progress forward. So to get back to the team, here we have a batch of people who recognized they wanted to work better. They recognized they wanted to, they recognized that they wanted to adopt practices that would help them become better.
Right.
And my point of view is sort of the opposite. And that is that it's not about our practices at all or ever. It's about how we think about things and our principles. And maybe, if you put it in the terms of the Agile Manifesto, our values and principles.
Right.
A principle-based approach in determining what practices we might follow is worth developing. Exactly determining which practices we'll follow is sort of something that will evolve out of following these principles.
Right.
So the way that this got discovered, essentially, was I was hired by somebody who was manager of a team that really was without a manager at the time.
Okay.
So they had, it's kind of like there was a missing bit in here.
Right.
And the person that wanted to become the manager of this team was a developer on the team. And this person, she didn't want to become a manager. She wanted to keep developing.
Sure.
And I had met her many years before. And if the people who watch your video want to know a tip about lining things up for good stuff to happen,
sure,
this is what happened in this case many years earlier, probably as many as 7 or 8 or even 9 years earlier than this. This particular person was going to interview for a job where she didn't know the technology. It was something that was coming up, and they wanted to get somebody who could answer some questions about that, so she called me. And I'd met her through some user groups, and I spent a couple days teaching her this technology. Best of I can remember, I don't think I charged her anything. In those days, I definitely was mostly just helping whenever I could help.
Cool. And
over time, she got that job, and over time, they needed somebody for this management position. And she said, who you should get is this person. So this is like, play the long game, and
yes.
This is like advice to myself. Play the long game and help everybody you can help. Because they're either going to learn on their own anyways, and so why don't you help them, and they'll be a friend of yours.
Yep.
That's sort of my attitude.
It's a great attitude.
So here's the thing. She said, hey, interview this guy for this position. And they interviewed me, and I laid out 4 or 5 things I felt were really important before I'd be willing to take the job. Another bit of advice from my dad was, the best time to look for a job is when you have a good job. And so I already had a good job, and I was entertaining almost any offer that might come my way because
sure.
I was looking for a bigger challenge. So here's the things that I laid out for them. The first thing is no interference. You're hiring me because you need to manage a team that you're having trouble with. They're not performing as you'd like them to perform. So if you're to tell me what to do, then you'd be essentially just getting more of the no results that you're already getting, the non-result you're already getting. The second thing is we're not going to do estimates. Estimates, in my opinion, and this was in 2011, but already long before that, 10 years before that, I had kind of started recognizing that estimates certainly weren't helping in our industry of software development. So we're not going to do them. You want estimates, you can make them yourself. Matter of fact, I'll be very bold about this. Someone who's managing software development, especially at these higher levels, if they don't understand what software development costs, they probably shouldn't be managing software development.
I agree, but unfortunately...
It's kind of a weird thing to get down.
I was going to say, I agree, but unfortunately, I mean, and I know you and I haven't had a ton of time to catch up, but I've worked with a ton of companies as a developer, and the vast majority of management does not understand any of this. In my opinion.
Absolutely. So
the tough part is, keep going.
Yeah, so we have to be cautious about this.
Right.
The point is that right now, there are a whole lot of people in their late teens, early 20s, who are getting into our industry.
Yes.
And if they can be exposed to these ideas, when they're at the level where they're managers, they won't have forgotten these ideas.
Exactly.
Right? So, the way the world isn't the way the world has to be. It's just the way it is.
Right.
So if we say, well, unfortunately, we can't do these things because the people in management don't understand these things. And I know I've been managing things pretty much my whole lifelong career. I've owned a number of businesses, something like 15 or 16 businesses over the years. I understand these things. I'll do a very blatant paraphrasing of Max Planck, who said something to the effect of, science advances one dead scientist at a time. Okay, so if we understand what I'm saying, and I hope that it's clear, this is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing.
It is.
It's that once we have beliefs, it's hard to change our beliefs.
Absolutely.
So as we advance in our career, the beliefs that we got when we were younger are going to kind of stick with us, even though if we're going to play the game of the companies we work within, we're maybe going to need to change some of our ways of working. We're not necessarily changing our beliefs. And when our opportunity comes, and I have tons of stories I can share about this, when the opportunity comes when you can make the decisions yourself for the company you're working with or in, then, you know, you'll be able to do the right thing. That's what my hope is. I'm playing a very long game with this. So I want to get back to the story. Okay. So the second thing was the no estimates. The third thing was, if the team is doing work that they're having a lot of difficulty with, maybe we've taken on the wrong kind of work. So I need to have the right to at least postpone, if not cancel, some of the work that they're doing. If they're overburdened with stuff they're having trouble with, it doesn't make sense to me that we just keep trying to figure out how to do that stuff. If it's really critical to the company, well, then let's spend the time becoming good at the things we need to become good at, and then tackle those things.
Can I interrupt you just for a
Oh, yeah, please
quick,
do.
Oh, no, it's okay. Just you mentioned something. I was curious about it. So one of the things, you know, I talk about on my channel, people talk about all the time, I know you talk about it as well, is kind of the large batch versus small batch mindset. And, you know, you were talking kind of about coming into this company, realizing people had essentially too big of a queue of work or too many things they're trying to do at once.
Sure.
That is one of the things I talk about on a lot of my videos, as far as, on one hand, what you're talking about, which is helping maybe the management change the way they look at it. I'm also trying to help developers kind of cope with being in companies that have not been able to make that shift, right? But they're still, you know, trying to deliver big batches of work. You don't have to answer this right now. I just want to make sure I didn't forget about it. But one of the things that I want to make sure we cover sometime today is, you know, I know you've got a conference coming up. You can talk about that. But I also wanted to find out, like, for individual developers, people who, you know, like you said, maybe are very early, maybe they're still even in school, or maybe, you know, 4 to 5 years into their career. I'd love to just make sure before, you know, we finish this, we give them an idea of maybe some places that they can go to find out, how can I as a developer, even though maybe in my culture of my existing company, I'm not looked at as the one who's sort of leading change. And I know that's a whole nother topic, right? The whole, like, who really should be changing stuff, that we could go down a rabbit hole with that. But if I'm a developer and maybe I'm at a company and maybe I am a little bit marginalized, right? Maybe people aren't looking to me to help improve the way that we deliver software, but I'm on the ground and I'm recognizing, you know what, we need to fix some of this stuff. And maybe they go out there and they find somebody like you. Is the next step for them kind of to go to one of these conferences, or is there, like, yeah, talk a little bit about, like, how do you propose people get in the door sort of with getting exposed to this maybe?
So first of all, I think that what we need to understand is that there's no place to go learn what you need to do in your space. You need to be good at learning how to work in the space you're in. So in other words, you're going to discover that for yourself. But I am sharing with you right now the things that I did to be able to have the influence that would allow this sort of change to occur. So I can address that for a second right now. I think the way that I'd like to say it is this. You know, there is the old clever saying that goes, you know, if you don't like where you're working, change the place you're working, or change the place you're working, you know.
Right.
So, you know, we can either stay here and try and make it better, or we can go somewhere else and try and make it better. So let me wrap up on the things that I kind of felt we needed to do.
Yes, please. Sorry about that. Go
ahead. A few, and then I think that will help us get to where we need to be.
Sure thing.
So, I've said there were 4 or 5, but I'm just going to share 4. So the 3 that we've already got, you know, no interference, no estimates. If they're working on stuff that is beyond them, let's stop doing that and let's just start delivering value. So that's about continual success. And the last one I want to share is we're not going to work in a project manner. we're going to work on things as if they have a very long life, and we're not going to bring people together to work on something and then split them apart. We're all going to work together. Now, this was a relatively small team. We're going to work together, so we're sharing all of our skills across the team in everything that we do. We're going to get some cross-training this way, and we're also going to get better results this way. Now, a few other things. We're going to make our work visible. We're going to learn to do useful retrospectives. And one of my practices on retrospectives for a while had been, let's do them daily instead of every week or 2 weeks or once a month. Most places I've been, I'd see them at the end of every iteration. They would call, a sprint kind of a thing. Yes. And I don't really buy into that at all. These cadences are mostly, at best, artificial, at worst, very harmful. Humans, some people argue that humans need cadences. But the only cadence I naturally adhere to myself is I pretty much sleep every day and eat every day. That's about all the cadence I need. But I'm sure there'll be plenty of people who argue against that.
Can't change that. No way to please everybody.
So there we go. So let's talk a little bit about how do I influence things in place. It took me from 1999 until 2011, and actually 2009, to build enough credibility in the community so that I could get a chance at getting the kind of jobs where I could influence things relatively easily. And I experimented with a lot of trying to influence things in organizations where I couldn't or had no control over what we would do and couldn't really influence anything. So what can I try? There's lots of things we can do. I wouldn't know where to send someone where to learn these things, but reading books such as Linda Rising's book on fearless change, she gives a lot of tips on how to influence things without you having the power to make these changes yourself.
Excellent.
But and so a few techniques that I've used, and this, for example, is one of them. With this particular team, I had reviewed their code, and I really felt that their code wasn't up to par or up to snuff. I don't know what's the right words.
We gotcha.
And yet, and as I reviewed their code, before I went to work there, I reviewed some code. I looked at their working practices, and I thought that they need to learn clean code type things, for example. But I've had experience trying to teach people or help guide people to the idea that we need to learn these things at other organizations. And I found that by telling people their code is bad and they need to learn how to make it better, that just makes enemies. So
yeah, definitely.
It's
calling their baby. You've heard the expression, "You're calling their baby ugly." I know that's a little bit, maybe out there, but I've heard that many times. Yeah, telling somebody they need to improve somebody—that's a whole science in and of itself. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, but what I do know is that I've had some books that helped me quite a bit with learning to be a better coder, and so I wanted to make sure I had those books available for them. Now, I may have at some point said, hey, this code's not very good, but I was really trying not to say things like that.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I was trying my best, and then with my personality, it's hard to do, to not point out these kinds of problems. So, but this is an important part of this. Mm-hmm. I offered to them that so I bought three books that were important to me at the time, and that was, Clean Code book and Working Effectively with Legacy Code, and then also Refactoring to Patterns. Those were all three good books at that time that I would still recommend to people. Anyways, I got those three books for each person on the team. But another very important thing was I had offered every Friday we'd spend 3 hours studying together. And during those 3 hours, we could study whatever you want to study. And you don't need to come. It's totally voluntary. And how we're going to study is going to be decided by the group and not by me. And what we ended up doing in those study periods was a coding dojo, where everybody would take a turn at the keyboard and take a turn navigating. And this is what grew into being mob programming. It's a style of doing a coding dojo that I had learned in 2009, I believe, and really liked, and started doing a lot at user groups and little conferences whenever I could do it, just for fun, because it's a fun thing to do. So to get to the end of the story of how we basically stumbled upon mob programming is we got together to look at some code that somebody was having trouble with. They wanted the rest of the team to look at and maybe help them think about what to do. We got together in a room to look at it, and instead of looking at it, we started working on it in a very much the coding dojo style, where somebody would take the keyboard and somebody else would guide them on what to do next. We follow a very simple rule that we learned from Zuill and Falco, and that's for an idea to go from somebody's head into the computer, it must go through somebody else's hands. And when we do that, we have to be able to communicate well with each other. So take all that together. On that very day, after a couple hours of working in that room, somebody came into the room and said, hey, you have to leave. We have this room scheduled for a meeting in a few minutes. So we stood up, and somebody with a lot of urgency said, let's go find another room. So this was like a big light bulb went off in my head. It was like this team had learned how to have cleaner code. They learned how to turn up the good on stuff by having frequent retrospectives. In our retrospectives, we would never talk about, or I should say, in the short end of day retrospectives, we would just ask, what went well today, and how do we turn that up for tomorrow?
Nice.
So if you take those 2 or 3 little things together, the team they learned how to work on this code by refactoring rather than by just reading it. They learned to turn up the good in real time because somebody's saying, let's go find another room. And at the end of the day, after we'd worked this way all day, that very first day, we asked ourselves, what went well and how do we turn that up for tomorrow? And the 4 main things that came in that little meeting, that little 5-minute retrospective was, we got a lot done. We learned a lot. It seemed that our work was very high quality. We had tests around everything we worked on. And we were having fun. So any one of those things would be enough for me to say, let's keep doing this tomorrow. But the team, it was just a team's decision. And they said, yeah. They all said, let's do this tomorrow. And that was 2011. And essentially, they haven't stopped working that way since.
Nice.
That particular team most of those folks are gone from the place where we started, Hunter Industries. But they now have 7 or 8 teams all working this way.
Cool.
And there are teams like this all over the world. People at ClearLink in Utah, people at Zito in San Diego here, Unruly, I don't know if they're still doing it, but I haven't talked to them recently, but in London, and many companies, TUI in Stockholm. So this is how mob programming came to be. We didn't set out to do something and say, hey,
right.
let's discover a new way of working that everybody's going to be interested in so we can become stars in the world of software development.
Right.
All we did was followed our own path to finding a better way for us to work, and we stumbled upon working well together.
That's awesome. Yeah, all the best things, I think, come about somewhat organically like that. That's a really cool origin story. Thanks for sharing that.
So now if we want to turn it to what would a person who's in the heat of a company where nothing seems to work very well, they're not happy with the way things are managed, what do we do about it? And I think that would be a good thing maybe to spend the rest of our time on if you want to. Whoops. And my approach is very much a long game. I don't know how to convince people of anything. I don't know how to change the place we're working into being what we would like it to be. What I do know is that we can improve our ability to influence things. And maybe, whether it's where we're working at now, or where we work somewhere else in the near future or much later, we will hopefully get some benefits out of learning to do that.
Definitely. No, I think that would be a great way to finish the show. We've got plenty of time left. Let me throw out there a little bit of what was really interesting, I think, about your origin story is I heard quite a few just points that you made about kind of how you arrived at this team and how you guys did things that touched on many of the videos I've done in the past on this channel, kind of about some of the philosophical approach you have. It sounds actually like we're really similar in a lot of the ways we look at things. One of the things that I started to learn to do better, and it's one of the, it's a lifelong thing, right? Once I went from, the first 10 years of my career, I was a product developer at various companies and an architect, and then the last 12 years I've been a consultant. And when I got into consulting, I dealt with that whole, you can't influence people with information issue, right? Like if I get up and show you a presentation or tell you how much better this is going to be, there's only so far you're going to get. At some point, you're going to hit into there may have been bad experiences that that person had in the past, or they may have been successful with systems that maybe we know or think we know don't work as well, but they had a past experience that was good. I think whether it's mob programming or no estimates or really anything that we're all trying to do in the industry to just try to be more successful, enjoy the work more, one of the things that I feel like software developers aren't putting enough, and this is just my opinion, that they aren't putting enough emphasis on in their career is the ability to influence people, which is what you talked about. Short of a success story like yours, which is, you got an opportunity, you kind of put your neck out there, right? And many of us have to, right? When we're going to try something new, nobody's going to go, hey, yeah, go ahead and try this unproven thing where I don't know exactly how it's going to go, right? Ultimately, a lot of times we got to just try it and hope it works out.
Well, so to be clear, I took this job because they agreed to the things that I had asked for.
That's
no
true,
interference for a year is like a primary one.
And that's quite an ask. That's
well,
quite
it is and it isn't.
Yeah.
So if we follow what I had said earlier, you only, the best time to look for a job is when you already have a good job.
Right.
So I wasn't, I had interviewed in a number of places that were contacting me about coming and helping their organization become better at software development. And I'd presented basically the same demands, if you want to put it that way. I would say requests. Sure. But they were demands. I will take the job if you agree to these things, and I won't otherwise. So we do have to understand. So I'd say, first of all, for younger people, let's start learning that the interview is about us getting enough information to decide whether we want to work at this place or not.
Right.
Okay, let's not think that, boy, oh boy, I can't wait to see if they're going to give me that job offer.
Right.
It's like, I can't wait to find out whether these are people I want to work with or not. So I'm going to do things in the interview and maybe outside of the interview to make that determination. Am I going to work for the right people? That, I would say, is going to be an important consideration.
Totally.
So moving forward on this, though, I would say that the reason I had enough freedom to do this is because I'd spent a lot of time building in the local community, building credibility.
Yes.
So as soon as I had things important enough to talk about, I would always take an opportunity to talk about them. When I first started down this path in 1999, I had a job that the guy who was running the place really understood. He was way in front of the curve or whatever on agile thinking. So he pretty much innately understood what agile was going to be about in a few years, but agile hadn't yet come upon the industry. It wasn't until 2001. So after that, it was a 3-month contract. They had a very specific chunk of work to do, and it had been divvied up into very small 2-week engagements with different companies. They had a client, and that client had a bunch of their own clients, and they needed to resolve some problems at each one of those clients, sort of the same problem over and over.
Okay.
Anyways, it wasn't so much about writing code as to about discovering how are we going to solve the problem, and then once that was figured out, it could be handed on. So that was run in a very agile manner. The fellow would fly to the customer and spend a few days at the customer. They would contact back at the shop where I was managing some developers, and we would start in on some stuff. As soon as this fellow would get back, we would be conferring with him constantly throughout the day and round-tripping with the customer, delivering the solution as we went.
Nice.
And then when it was done, and we moved on to the next thing. But this was essentially what modern software development looks like, but this was 20 years ago. After that good adventure, I decided, boy, I'm really glad I'm in this industry, and I want to see how the big boys do it. So I took a contract. I had a choice of 2 really big contracts that were offered to me, big company contracts. I was just going to be a developer.
Okay.
But these were contracts with big companies to do, to be a developer on some effort they had. And both of these companies were huge, and I chose the one that seemed to be a little more agile than the other. And again, agile wasn't yet a term, and I think I would have called it extreme programming.
Sure.
Point being this, that second contract turned out to be miserable. That the way it was run, even though they were doing iterations, was done very poorly. And the origin story of my sharing about no estimates around the world comes from this contrast of these two companies, or these two efforts. The one was just a small team. The other was something on the order of 200 or 300 people in a much, much larger company than that. And so the contrast is what I was noticing, and I was paying a lot of attention, taking a lot of notes at that time. And what I really was discovering, they were trying to do things that were actually harming their ability to do software development well. But I kept my mouth shut for quite a while.
Yeah.
And then finally one day, in a retrospective, in those days they didn't call it retrospectives, they called them lessons learned or something like that. And they were doing them each iteration, so it's sort of a modern agile way of considering these things. Three things came up. One was that the estimates were off and they weren't very useful because of that. The second one was that we didn't really understand the requirements well at the beginning of the iteration, and so that gave us a lot of trouble just learning about the things as we did the work.
Yep.
And then the last thing was that the requirements then started changing during the iteration. So essentially, it was just this between these two things. So I'm watching in this retrospective that the estimates aren't helping us, the requirements weren't well understood, and they kept changing. Well, these are very related things, but I didn't say much about it because this was a job I really wanted to have. I was really relatively new in writing software for other people. I'd spent 15 prior years of my career writing software for a company that I had, and I didn't have any of these kinds of issues.
Oh, okay.
So now I was learning about these issues. When I did finally decide to speak about it was 4.5 months into it. And I said, I think that this indicates something I've seen many times. And that's that we're trying to solve some things we perceive as being problems, but they're actually symptoms of some problem. And so if these are symptoms of a problem, maybe let's stop trying to solve the symptoms and let's try and discover what the problem actually is. Yep. And these three things are very, very closely related. And much of what I've grown to understand about software development all goes back to this time. And if we expect the estimates to help us, but we don't really completely understand the requirements, and the requirements are going to change once we start working on them, maybe we need to find a different way to work on things. So that was the beginning of me realizing that, and I already knew that I needed to be able to speak publicly, and I was scared to death of talking in front of an audience. I was very bad at it. I couldn't even form sentences most of the time. Unless I was reading right off of a script, I had a heck of a time with it. But I knew I had to learn to become somehow decent enough at it so I could start talking about what I saw as issues in our industry, and at the same time find other people who are willing to discuss these things openly with me rather than just defending their current way of working. What you'll find when you bring up things like, why are we dividing up everybody into separate cubicles? Why don't we bring them all together and have them work together? There's going to be a lot of defense.
Yep.
Trying to defend that. Why do we work the way we work? Same thing will go with estimates, and I'm perfectly fine with that. There's people who truly believe that these estimates are helping them. They believe to the degree that they just cannot accept anything else contrary to that. And I understand that.
Me too.
I work hard to keep myself from falling into those traps. But my firm belief is that software development falls into the domain that, the Cynefin framework called the complex domain. And that's not necessarily a domain where estimates are very useful.
Right.
We have other ways we can work, and we might as well try to, I would say, at least attempt to learn how to work within the nature of software development. This is a key problem for young people, and the reason I'm saying young people is because they're the ones that I think are going to make the difference as we go by. They can form their thoughts now before they're too rock solid.
I agree.
Now, I don't think an older person like me is hampered from changing their mind about stuff. I try to keep a very open mind, and I'm open to have my beliefs change. My hopes aren't changed. I keep hoping that we will get through this and things will get better and better. That hasn't changed all along. But some of the things I used to believe in, I don't think I believe in anymore. So many of the things I've tried have proven to me that what I used to think was incorrect. So, yeah.
Yeah, and that's really interesting you saying that, because this is just something that we talk about on my channel, and that I know a lot of us get frustrated with, which is just that, I think still so many companies, the way that they're set up, as far as motivating and rewarding people, is still on an individual basis, right? Many people
Sure.
get a position, they talk privately in a review about their performance. And in these companies where estimates have a really strong focus and they're looked at as valuable, then it kind of motivates developers to focus on things they're assigned to at the behest of teamwork. And this is one of the things that I've talked a lot about, is just it basically creates toxic teams over time. People stop collaborating and working together. I feel like when I'm in the thick of a project that's going bad, like things are going really poorly, and things are starting to spiral out of control, and I've been trying to have conversations with people about trying to do things different. Often when they start to feel some real tangible pain, then they're ready sometimes to have these conversations. What I wanted to ask you about, though, was where I'm really actually fascinated with trying to use mob programming and a lot of these other techniques that I think are way more realistic in software development, is actually at the beginning of the project. And one thing I wondered was if you could maybe just talk a little bit about, like, if you've ever run up into, I think one of the common, and I talked about this at the beginning, one of the common, I don't know if it's a misconception or just kind of like a limited understanding of mob programming, is I think some people look at it like, we're going to get everybody together, we're going to get everybody understanding things better, doing higher quality work, and then we'll just get rid of the mob once everybody's to this level of understanding that we feel like they can just go independently develop. Have you had that be an issue for you before, or no? It's like
not that I know of.
Okay.
No, I haven't actually heard of that before.
Okay.
Anybody who's to the degree where they're ready to consider mob programming, then at least as I define mob programming, then they're basically not thinking in those terms at all. That sounds more like what, an old-fashioned term for that might have been a swarm. We're going to get everybody together, figure out what this problem is, then we're going to split up so we can get it done.
Yes.
And
I think
that's a different thing than mob programming. Mob programming specifically is a group of people working together. So it's not like having a meeting where we investigate what our problem is so we can get work separately on it. So the definition of mob programming is all the brilliant minds working on the same thing at the same time in the same space.
Right. And I think part of the reason probably that I have seen this kind of misperception that and I more often will see it, I'll be honest, which is where we see a lot of this type of crap, which is Twitter. I see a lot of people either respond to you or other people that are talking about no estimates and mob programming and things like that as, oh, well, that sounds like something that would be good to break through, like a problem, but then just keep going kind of thing. And I think you're right. If somebody's at the point where they're like, we know we have so many problems, we know the system isn't working, we're going to try mob programming, especially if they bring somebody like you or somebody else maybe that you've worked with that's sort of really good at doing this. By that point, it's like you're making a big change here and you're trying something very different. And I can see why you would ask, look, if I'm going to come in and help this team, I need to have the ability to, basically make decisions on how this team works. Otherwise, you're just going to get backdoored, right?
Well, so where we originally did mob programming, and I want to be clear, I don't know that we invented anything. I'm sure people have worked as teams doing software development before us. It's just that it's very hard to find anything that clearly defines what they were doing as being essentially the same as what we were doing.
Right.
So the mob programming term itself came from a paper that was written back in 2001 or 2002 that was part of the Extreme Programming Conference of that year.
Okay.
But anyways, and I'm not sure, I have read the paper a couple times. I'd have to go back and refer to it to see what to address it directly right now. But without doing that, here's the thing. Things like no estimates and mob programming are both out there and being talked about because there are people who are also thinking about these same things. So it's not like we had any exclusive knowledge about these things.
Right. It's not like a Woody Zuill brand.
Right.
I get you.
So I take a deep responsibility for it right now. When we first started doing it, we were just doing it. A friend of mine who's a teacher, he teaches coding practices and a lot of techniques and so on. He goes into companies to do that. We brought him in to do some training for us, and he noticed the way we were working. Now, this friend of mine, I've already mentioned, Llewellyn Falco, he and I had been doing these coding dojos at user groups and so on for a couple of years, and other kinds of activities similar to that. And so when he came in to do some training for us and he noticed we were actually working this way, it was a real, I think, an eye-opener for him, and he started telling other people about it. So we didn't go out to tell others that this is what we were doing, but now people started contacting us. And then I was at a conference in 2012, the big Agile conference in Dallas, and people started coming up to me and saying, hey, what's this thing Llewellyn's been telling us about? And I started explaining it. And after 5, maybe 6 or 7 people came up, I thought, well, I can spend my entire conference explaining over and over again what we're doing.
Right.
Or I'll put together a talk. Because this, at the Agile Alliance in those days conference, they would have, they had an open jam where you could propose a talk while at the conference. And if people want to come hear it, they would just come over to that area and hear your little talk. So that's what I did. And what ended up happening was that it just grew from that. I started then getting invitations. By the end of the next year, I had already been invited to several conferences in Europe to speak about this, and I had spoken across the U.S. at things like the Scrum Gathering and a couple other conferences. So, this was just something that happened, and it's kind of the same with no estimates. No estimates, the basic idea of no estimates is if we have confidence in a practice we're using, great. But if we have no way to validate that this practice, that our confidence is well placed, we probably should be investigating what is it that we are believing and why we're believing it. I do workshops on it, but only because people ask me to. I would in no way believe that I need to change our industry. What I think that is useful for us to do is to consider alternatives to the way we're currently doing things. I would be so bold, though, to say, not yet have I heard anybody tell me a good system for validating that their estimates allowed them to make good decisions. What I will normally hear is somebody say, we do the estimates so we can make decisions.
Right.
I can make decisions really easily, just with the flip of a coin. I don't need help making decisions. I need help making good decisions. And for me, the main focus of no estimates is not whether we estimate or not. It's what are the kinds of decisions we're trying to make. If the kind of decisions we're trying to make require that we use estimates, then we probably need to use estimates.
Can I?
Right?
Yeah, totally. Can I interject something real quick about that? So yeah, I mean, this is, as a developer for, I don't know how many years it's been now, a long time, I do go into companies depending on how they hire me, and I'll help them more at the strategic level, and I've done, agile coaching and been a scrum master and all that, but like really, and this is part of the reason I started this YouTube channel is, I will talk to people about estimates, where I don't know them that well, they're not ready to be fully honest with me, or I'll be like in front of leadership or in stand-up meetings, it depends on if they're doing Scrum or Kanban, right, or whatever under the sun it is, but, I'll find that I think management and especially developers give a very different perception of the value of estimates at a company that's using them. But if you talk to them privately, they're totally honest, if you can get them to really be honest with you, that they're just complete BS. Meaning, and I had just put a clip up last weekend on Reddit about this that kind of blew up, which was kind of cool. It got like over 200 comments and a bunch of people arguing about this. And one of the things that I think is the reason that we still even talk about this is we've got a lot of people who aren't actually doing the programming. They're not actually doing the work. And they've been on projects where, other people doing the work have estimated, and it looks to them like, well, the estimates were met. I mean, again, depending on how the project went. But without them actually being the person that did the work, they don't often recognize the amount of theatrics that are going on with the work to make those estimates look like they were viable. And again, this is, like you said at the beginning, totally contextual. I'm just talking about certain, teams I've been on, not all of them. But when I think about getting rid of estimates and, moving to mob programming and things like this, one of the things I like to ask people is, like, what makes a project successful? Does making a project successful mean we've finished building it? No. What makes a project successful is that what we built actually is either generating revenue, or it's solving a problem, or it's whatever the outcome is. And this is the whole, right, everybody talks about the outcome or output versus outcomes argument and all that. But like, how, one of the things I've been and man, we could do a whole nother probably follow up on this, but like, one of the things I'm trying to figure out is, like, when we're going into a company that is very focused on predictability, like feeling like they can know exactly when things are going to be done and exactly, controlling how many problems there are. My experience has been as a developer, and you have too, that like, and I know a lot of people don't subscribe to me because they just don't believe with this, and I don't really care. It's my opinion that basically you can't predict software development. That the best thing that we can do is do as little amount of work as possible to minimize the impact where we're, people like to say, wrong, but where we need to learn something. Does mob programming, when it's kind of really being fully supported by the people that brought you in and everything, do you think that encourages kind of small batch changes in a way where the business is able to see, wow, now that we got everybody in a room together and they're all kind of speaking the same language and everything, the business outcomes that we're having, we're starting to get some return on investment. We're not just looking at a chart and going, hey, the burn down chart looks good. We're actually like making some money, or we're actually like influencing our market. Is that part of kind of the story behind this at all, or?
Well, yeah, certainly. This is a much bigger thing than,
maybe I went
what
too
we're
wide.
trying to cover here right now.
Right.
But so to start with, most firms are probably highly dysfunctional anyways. So
I agree.
Whether we can actually influence things for the better, and is there a better we can influence them towards, is questionable. There are a lot of people thinking, I would say, much further down the road than what we're addressing right here. An individual cannot come into a system and affect that system. So if we take, for example, John Gall's main law, a working complex system invariably emerged or evolved out of a working simple system. So continuing with that, he will say that a working complex system that isn't doing anything useful to us cannot be changed. If we try to change it, it will, and I'm paraphrasing him.
That's fine.
It will resist that change to a degree that it can't be changed. And you can't just create a new complex working system and plug it into place. The initial law is a working complex system invariably emerged from a working simple system. So the idea of something like mob programming and why we were able to start mob programming is the important story. It's not mob programming itself. Mob programming came into being because of those things I kind of mentioned, that we wouldn't be interfered with for a year, that we weren't going to do estimates, and so on. So the person who hired me, his name was Mark Case, he needed to have enough, at least hope, that this stuff would work. Now, he wanted to see Agile come into this team, and this team had been asking to learn about being Agile. And so, I thought, I feel, and I think he would tell you that I was probably the closest thing to somebody who he thought could help that happen. And that's why I was brought in. So, if we're sitting in a company where there's too many minds to change, an organization does not have a idea. It's the people in the organization that have ideas, right?
Exactly.
So the company itself has a system that's been made up of a whole bunch of people who are operating within that system.
Exactly.
So the system is not external to those people, because the system, in my opinion, because the system itself won't exist if those people aren't there.
Right.
If you were to come into a company and say, okay, we're going to really make things better, so I'm going to get rid of everybody, and we're going to start all over again. Okay? Now we at least have a chance at having something good happen, but if you can see, if you come in and you want to make the change. So why did it work at Hunter? Why did the mob programming come to be? Is because we created this bubble of this, we would have an opportunity without the interference, that we wouldn't do some of the practices that I knew were not good, and that any new practice we brought on was going to be voluntary. It was going to be gently brought on by the team itself, discovering by trying things how to work forward.
Awesome.
So I could share a couple things about this that I think are critical.
Sure.
I do believe that if we create that, and then Michael Sahota talks about these bubbles as well, create a bubble where good things can happen. And then within that bubble, if we start having good things happen, then there's a chance that we can maintain that bubble beyond the initial period. Now, we can have those bubbles without anybody knowing they're happening. And in the old days, we used to call this, we're flying under the radar. Nobody knows what we're doing.
Right.
And that actually works really well for things like mob programming, because who outside of the management of this software development cares how the team is working? If there are people who care how the team is working, like they think that pair programming or everybody should be working solo, well, they're probably stepping outside of their own territory, and they're wanting to control other territories. So these are empire builders. We have all these things in common.
Yeah, I was going to say that, unfortunately, in my career has been, as it's gone on, more common the more people I think have become agile coaches that didn't grow out of a software development career, but that are kind of pure. I think some of that's starting to be more common. That's just been my experience. But I agree with you, what you're saying, philosophically.
What it comes down to is this, that the system that's in place could probably be nudged, and it can probably be changed over time. If we use this bubble kind of idea, and I can't go into detail here with the amount of time we have,
sure,
we can talk about it some other time. The way that I think about it is, if we start a good thing happening in one little part of a larger organization, then others in the organization might see that. Other people at our same level in the organization, if I'm a manager 3 levels down from the highest levels, well, then maybe other managers at my level will enjoy working this way and find they're getting better value from us, and they'll start trying to do those things in their own teams. Maybe it's not software development, but maybe marketing or finance or production or whatever it might be. So I think these things can happen. But I would say this. There are people trying other ways. We have this mob programming conference coming up, April 11th and 12th.
Right.
One of our keynote speakers is Karin Tonelius, who has a company called Tough Management out of Stockholm. And I'm very fascinated by what she's doing, and I'm really looking forward to her talk.
Cool.
I've watched several podcasts of her and listened to several podcasts and things that she's done. She basically is talking about how to bring these changes into existing companies. She did a very interesting experiment, and if I understand it correctly, it's something like this. She started in her career just learning to do management. And then as she applied that management, she wasn't very happy, or those things she learned, she wasn't happy with the results. She wasn't happy with the way things were for the people who are working within these systems. And she started studying other ways of managing businesses, not software necessarily, other lines of business. As she got good at that, other people started noticing it and wanting to get her help, and she would go to help them. Now, I could have the story wrong because I'm still at the beginning of this, but I believe what she found was that they really usually weren't ready to change. They wouldn't get the success that she had because they weren't willing to do the things that needed to be done, which is pretty much, going to be around making it so that the teams that are doing the work can be completely self-managed and self-organized.
Yeah, it's
and
a trust
almost
issue.
Impossible.
Yep.
That's right.
Yep.
And so this is how she went forward, and I just really am excited about this. She decided to just go ahead and buy companies that were not doing well, and needed to apply the things that she is teaching. Now,
wow.
So when you read about her, she says, well, we had some successes and some failures, but we know a lot more about what works. And I'm really excited to have her as a keynote at the Mob Programming Conference in Boston, April 11th and 12th.
That's fascinating. Yeah, I'll after we wrap this up, I'll probably get a couple links from you. I definitely want to put a link in the video to her information too, so they can look that up.
So
that is fascinating.
She's somebody. Yeah. I highly recommend at least people becoming familiar with what she's doing. Cool. I am looking forward to growing my understanding of what she's doing. Now, the other main keynote, the keynote that we have, is from Linda Rising. So Linda Rising, I mentioned earlier. But I haven't been to a conference in 7 or 8 years, once I start going to the larger conferences, that if she happened to be there, that I would miss her talks. Now, sometimes you have to because of conflicts, but she really is, she understands human nature. She talks about the thinking fast and slow. She's very knowledgeable about the psychology of change and techniques for dealing with that. So I'd love to see people come to this just for those two keynotes. But the conference itself is essentially about, it's a gathering of people who've been doing mob programming, some of them for as much as 5, 6, 7 years. Two of our original team members, me and Chris Lucian, will be there. Mark Case, the manager or the director that hired me. So this is like two sides of the same coin. When he hired me, I was coming up from the team level to manage a team, and he was coming down from the management level.
Nice.
And what his main job would be is to interface with the rest of the company, so to allow us to have the freedom to figure out how to best work. In fact, I would make this really clear. A team that can self-organize will figure out how to best work if they're given the opportunity to do that and are given the, I would say, guidance in how to go about doing that. Because most of us have spent our entire careers working alone or working counter to making things better because we're just trying to protect our own sanity.
Yeah.
We're just trying to keep it where we can get through the day. So we'll go along with stuff that we don't agree with because, it just makes it possible for us to get through the end of the day and not completely have a meltdown.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that's important for my audience out there. If you're curious about mob programming yourself, I had an interview with John Cutler about 6 or 7 months ago where he brought up this comment about and it was his opinion, but I think a lot of people thought this was a great point he made, that, one of the criticisms of the agile community, the way some of the past conferences have gone, is there's a lot of theory, but maybe not quite as much to people talking about what they've actually done that's been successful. And I know he was giving the DevOps community props for doing a better job of that. What you're talking about, I think it sounds similar to that vein, meaning you're going to have people there who are doing this, who can talk about.
Well, so I'm going to make this really clear.
Yeah.
I go to a lot of Agile conferences, and they are just jam-packed with people who are doing stuff and sharing what they're doing and the successes they're having and how they've gone about doing it. There's always going to be some people who probably don't have that experience that are sharing some things, but it's hard to know who has and who hasn't. But for example, at the Mob Programming Conference, we've got Tori Powell, who's coming from ClearLink, where they have 13 or 14 teams working this way.
Wow.
Matt Ferguson from Zito in San Diego that has 6 teams working this way. They've been doing it a couple years. In the past, we've had people from Unruly, Alex Wilson, and others. Another coming from Sweden is Leonard Frieden, who's been doing mob programming since about 2013 and has a ton of experience introducing it at places and having good success with it. There's a woman coming from SVT, that's like Sverige Television in Sweden, who started doing this about 2 or 3 years ago. They now have something like 6 or 7 teams working doing mob programming. She happens to be a UX designer on the team. So almost everybody, so I'm going to make this clear. The Mob Programming Conference is about mob programming together. So what we're trying to do is gather people from around the world who've been doing it for a substantially long enough time to have good experiences to share. They've seen the problems. They've seen how do we make it possible for a company to adopt something like this?
Right.
But the other side is also people who have never done it before, who want to learn about it. That's, of course, a big part of why we're doing this. I would say my initial idea was, let's just have a place we can all get together who are already doing this so we can learn from each other. But that is also ultimately interesting to people who want to learn about it.
Yes.
So we'll get some of both of that. So yeah, I'd love to see anybody who's interested in learning about this. It's a great opportunity.
That's great. Yeah, and I'm fascinated just to see, usually my interview videos, they take a little bit longer to get views, but I do get some people who just have some really interesting feedback. It'll be interesting to see. I haven't really talked much about mob programming on any of the other videos, what level of interest people have and what their experiences have been. But, man, this has been great. I really appreciate you coming on. Do you want to talk?
You.
Absolutely welcome. No, I'm really glad you agreed to do this with me. I think it's really going to help a lot of people. Do you want to talk any more about either how people can find out more or where to go to kind of follow what's going on? I mean, obviously, I included your Twitter handle in the overlay so people can follow you on Twitter. Do you want to leave us with any parting kind of thoughts?
Well, so mob programming itself has a lot of there's a lot of people talking about it and doing it. You can just do a general search in a search engine and find plenty about mob programming. I do have a thing called mobprogramming.org where you can, at least I think that's the handle I use for it, you can read some articles we wrote a few years ago.
Okay.
I'll be speaking at a bunch of conferences coming up. One right now is going to be the Agile India. If you happen to be in India and you're watching this, in just a week from today, actually, I'm leaving on Wednesday, so and today is Sunday, so that means I'm leaving on the 13th. Next week will be that. I'll be at the Mob Programming Conference, but then also at the Agile Alliance's Deliver Agile Conference in Nashville.
Wow.
And that's coming up pretty soon.
You're a busy man.
Yeah,
Good
so
Lord.
April and May are going to be really busy,
Yeah.
and then I'll probably take a little time off in June, who knows. I will be in Sweden in June at the IDG conference. I think it's IDG, and if I'm wrong about that, I apologize, and we'll get a correct link for it. And lots of stuff coming up in the fall.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. So if any of you out there are not familiar with Woody, I would just encourage you. He's a good person to follow on Twitter and kind of follow some of his thoughts, even if maybe mob programming isn't something that you're completely excited about trying just yet. I find, the kind of agile DevOps, lean, all these people, if you go up on Twitter, it's actually a smaller community than you really think it is. And I think, if you kind of look up Woody, at least my experience has been, there's a lot of other really great people with a lot of really great ideas about better ways to do these things that are, talking with Woody as well. So I just encourage people to go look him up. Well, thanks so much.
I'm always happy to help in any way I can.
It's been great. No, I really appreciate it. Well, I hope to have you on maybe again sometime in the future. I'd like
Excellent.
to do some more, more research myself into this and talk to some more people who have, like my friend I was talking about who has experience with this. But I really appreciate, honestly, anybody in this industry that's doing anything to try to make it better because, as I've said in many videos, I work with too many software developers that get into this career. They're very gifted and talented, and then they get frustrated by kind of going through work all day feeling like they have handcuffs on. So, anything you or anybody else is doing to try to free people to just, enjoy their work and be more creative, I'm all for it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you again soon.
All righty. Thank you much.
Thanks, Woody.
Bye.